Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
This is Faith Under Fire. Each Thursday on Family Life, we give voice to religious battlegrounds in this nation. I'm your host, Tracy Lynn. With us today, Christopher Ferrara, special counsel with the Thomas More Society. So last month, New York State issued a vaccination mandate for healthcare workers to keep their job effective September 27th. But mid-September, Judge David Hurd with the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of New York put in place a temporary restraining order for the mandate, to the great relief of many healthcare workers across the state. Chris, would you tell us about the more recent developments?
Well, the state attempted to accelerate the argument on whether the temporary restraining order should be converted to a preliminary injunction. That argument was scheduled for September 28th after submission of the state's brief. They wanted to have it heard on the 24th, which was pretty clearly an attempt to do an end run around the TRO, the temporary restraining order, which would have prevented the firings that were scheduled to happen under the challenge mandate on September 27th. At the same time, however, the state was telling an appellate court in another case where a TRO was denied that there was no need to grant a TRO pending that appeal because there was a TRO in our case. So on one hand, they were relying on the TRO in an appellate court while attacking it in the court that we are in. So the judge, in response to this, wasn't having any of it and said there will be no hearing on the 24th, no hearing on the 28th. The parties will simply submit their papers. The TRO will be extended to October 12th, by which date the judge will issue a decision on whether the temporary restraining order will become a preliminary injunction. So that's obviously a positive development, not what the state wanted, just as obviously.
Yeah, and in a nutshell, why do the healthcare professionals that you represent oppose New York's vaccine mandate?
They oppose it because of the connection of all of the available COVID-19 vaccines to abortion, either in testing, development, or production. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is the worst of the three because cells derived from a fetal cell line that came from an aborted child are used to actually produce elements of the vaccine within the cells themselves, and then supposedly the products are purified so that no fetal DNA sneaks into the vaccine, although it's questionable whether that purification is 100% effective. So all three vaccines pose a moral problem for them. And within the Catholic Church, there's disagreement on this.
So, Chris, the Empire State has flip-flopped on the religious exemption when it comes to COVID shots. Toward the end of August, the exclusion was taken away. Does the court's temporary restraining order invalidate the vaccine mandate for every healthcare worker in New York, or do those in opposition on religious grounds need to request a religious exemption from their employer?
What the temporary restraining order does, and what we hope the preliminary injunction will do, is simply to end the mandate's elimination of the possibility of a religious exemption. When the mandate said that there could only be a medical exemption, but not a religious one, it effectively obliterated the protections of Title VII, which requires the accommodation of religious beliefs under federal law, and also the protections which are parallel to those protections in state law, including the New York Human Rights Law. So the judge has said basically that's a violation of the Supremacy Clause because federal law is supreme over state law. That's what the TRO suggests. And also it suggests that we're likely to prevail on the merits of that claim. And it's also a violation of the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment because it penalizes people in violation of their right to accommodation, their religious beliefs, under penalty of losing their jobs if they won't take these vaccines. So all the TRO does, and we hope the preliminary injunction will also do, is to say that employers must accept applications for religious exemptions, and they can't use the mandate as an excuse. Now, each employer will have to decide these exemption requests, but as I advised the court, multiple plaintiffs in this case, and they are proceeding anonymously, have, since the TRO, been granted exemptions that were either granted before and revoked, or were pending and had yet to be decided upon. So we've already had a positive outcome here.
So for other folks that are listening that are not a part of your suit, do you think that they should just go ahead and request a religious exemption right now because we're not sure how things will play out?
If I were a healthcare worker in one of the covered entities, I would notify the HR department of the existence of the TRO and its extension to October 12th and request a religious exemption immediately. Each case will be decided by whatever committee or authority at each hospital or covered institution handles these things. But you should present a request, and you should make clear the basis for your belief. If you're not a Catholic, it could be some other teaching. The requirement is only that you have a sincere belief that you hold with religious conviction, not just some personal preference.
We have a lot of listeners who are Protestants. Governor Kathy Hochul has vowed to fight the temporary restraining order that blocks the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers in hospitals and nursing homes. Is there anything noteworthy done to date in this case by state officials, and what's likely the next step?
Their brief in opposition to our position is due today at 5 p.m., and after that, the judge has made it clear that there will be no need for further appearances or arguments before him, and he will just decide the case based on the brief submitted by each side. And that decision will be announced on or before October 12th, the date to which he extended the temporary restraining order.
Chris,
I do note that his most recent order indicates the likelihood of irreparable harm to these plaintiffs, meaning harm that cannot be remedied by money damages. For example, you get fired from a hospital because you won't take the vaccine, you lose your admitting privileges as a doctor. Well, you can't have a private practice in many cases unless you can admit people to a hospital, and they would become unemployable throughout the state of New York because who's going to give them admitting privileges under this mandate? One hospital won't, no hospital will. They'll just point to the state's mandate and refuse you privileges. So you become unemployable as a physician, or you become unemployable as a nurse. And there could be disciplinary consequences and malpractice insurance consequences and reputational consequences. It would be a catastrophe for these people. And this mandate is crazy. Even California's mandate, which is similar to New York's, has a religious exemption provision. That's how bad this particular mandate is. It's preposterous, really.
What can healthcare workers do in the days ahead to safeguard their own decisions when it comes to vaccines or other future government mandates that violate their core convictions?
They can seek a religious exemption. If the religious exemption is denied, they can proceed under Title VII by filing a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or they can proceed under the New York human rights law, New York State's version of it, or New York City's version if you're in New York City. Or you can do all three, and you should just go to someone who does religious discrimination cases, who is an expert on the interplay between these three alternatives and which one should be used, one of them, both of them, all three of them, or two of them. That's a complex question. But first, begin your process by filing a discrimination complaint. And even there, you should be consulting someone who does this for a specialty. There are plenty of discrimination lawyers out there that you can consult. Unfortunately, the Thomas More Society is not able to handle thousands of these requests. I don't think any organization can. But we can say this much: make your request, pursue your religious discrimination remedies under state and federal law if the request is denied.
Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us an update. Where can we learn more about this case and the work that you're doing?
You can go to the docket of the case if you have a PACER account. General public can sign up for PACER, P-A-C-E-R. And then once you're in PACER, you go to the Northern District, and you can actually put in the case number and look at the docket. It's a public record. And then, of course, there will be press accounts, most of which will be inaccurate, of course. So go to the Thomas More Society website, thomasmoresociety.org, for updates on the case.
That's Christopher Ferrara with the Thomas More Society. I'm Tracy Lynn, Family Life News.